I have always lived in the shadow of my sister, who in my parents' eyes seemed almost perfect, someone no one could compare to. And since I was young, I became used to every family dinner revolving around her achievements, from high grades and awards to endless praise from teachers, while I would sit quietly listening, sometimes trying to share a small story of my own, only to be quickly forgotten, as if it never existed. Over time, I learned to stay silent more often, not because I had nothing to say, but because I understood that whatever I said would not truly be noticed. I remember clearly the times I brought home my first certificates filled with excitement, hoping for a proud look or a word of praise from my parents, but all I received were casual nods and the quotey, familiar sentence, "Try to be like your sister," a phrase repeated so often that it became a lingering echo in my mind, making me feel like I was never enough, no matter how hard I tried. My sister was not a bad person, and she never intentionally made me feel small, but the constant invisible comparison from my family created a distance I could never cross. Whenever guests came over, my parents would proudly introduce her, first sharing her achievements with shining eyes, while I was mentioned only as an afterthought, a name added just to complete the picture, and that made me slowly withdraw into myself. I began to question whether I truly belonged in this family, or if I was merely a faint shadow standing behind my sister's light. There were nights when I lay awake for hours wondering what I had to do to be seen, to hear my parents say they were proud of me just once, but I eventually realized that the more I tried to earn their recognition, the more exhausted I became. Because in their eyes, I would always just be her younger sibling. And from those emotions, a quiet determination began to grow inside me. Not to compete with my sister, but to prove that I had my own worth, that I was not anyone's shadow, and no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, I would keep moving forward. Because deep down, I believed that one day, my efforts would be seen, even if not by my own family. My sister's graduation day arrived faster than I expected, and from early morning, the house was filled with excitement, as if it were the most important event in our family's life. My mother rushed back and forth preparing food, fresh flowers were placed all over the living room, and my father kept calling friends and relatives to invite them to celebrate. The atmosphere felt both familiar and distant to me, because I knew I would once again play the role of someone standing in the background, helping with everything but never truly being at the center of the joy. When my sister walked out in her graduation gown, all eyes turned toward her. Compliments poured in endlessly, people saying how talented she was and how bright her future looked, and my parents could not hide their pride, their eyes shining with every congratulatory word, as if all their efforts had been fully rewarded. I stood there smiling, helping guests, pouring drinks, arranging tables and chairs, doing all the small tasks to make the party perfect. Sometimes someone would ask me a polite question, but the conversation would quickly return to my sister, who was the center of every discussion. I did not blame them, because she truly deserved everything she had achieved. Yet the feeling of being overlooked quietly lingered inside me, like a familiar emotion I could not quite name. As the party reached its peak, the cake was brought out, and everyone sang together, laughter and voices filling the room. I stood behind it all, watching like an observer rather than a participant. There was a moment when I wondered if anyone would notice if I was not there, and the answer made my chest feel tight, but I quickly pushed that thought away and kept my smile, because I did not want to ruin her special day. After the party, when everyone began to leave, my parents were still excitedly talking about the compliments she had received, speaking about her future with complete confidence and expectation. And I sat beside them listening. As I always did, what stayed with me was not that they were proud of her, but that not a single person mentioned me. Not even a simple question, like, "What about you?" in that moment. I realized I had become so used to standing outside the spotlight that I sometimes forgot I had my own dreams and ambitions. And on that day, that seemed to belong entirely to her, a quiet feeling began to grow within me, not jealousy, but a strong desire to step out of that shadow and live a life where I was not just supporting someone else's success, but becoming the main character of my own story. I stood beside them helping with everything, while quietly observing how the entire room revolved around my sister, every small detail reminding me of my familiar role in this family, the silent supporter, the one who is always present but rarely noticed. As the party grew more crowded, I automatically moved between groups of guests, adjusting chairs that were out of place, clearing used glasses, bringing out more food. When I noticed a table running low, everything happened almost instinctively, as if I had been programmed to do these things without needing to be told. Meanwhile, my sister remained at the center, her smile bright, her voice confident, every story she told, capturing people's attention. And whenever someone laughed loudly or applauded, I would instinctively turn to look like an audience member, watching a performance I did not belong to. There were moments when I stood close enough to hear every compliment directed at her, yet far enough that no one thought to include me in the conversation. I do not know when I became invisible in moments like these. Perhaps it was when I began to accept that my presence did not make a difference. When a relative asked what I was studying, I had just started to answer. When my father interrupted, shifting the conversation back to my sister and enthusiastically talking about her achievements, I paused for a moment, then smiled, as if nothing had happened, and continued with my tasks because that reaction was no longer unfamiliar. It had repeated enough times that I was no longer surprised. What affected me more than being interrupted was the feeling that my voice carried no weight, as if my story was not important enough to be heard completely. I continued moving around the room occasionally, meeting my sister's gaze. She smiled at me warmly, with no hint of superiority or distance, and that only made my feelings harder to define, because clearly she had done nothing wrong. Everything seemed to come down to how people saw us. One person who always shined, and one who stood behind, as the party grew louder. I found a small corner to rest, holding a glass of water without really drinking it. I looked around and realized that everyone was busy enjoying their own moment, while I stood outside it all, not because I was pushed out, but because I had never truly been pulled in. A quiet emptiness settled inside me. Not overwhelming, but strong, enough to make me realize that I did not want to continue like this forever. I did not want to remain on the sidelines, in my own family, did not want to repeat the same role every time something important happened. And in that moment, surrounded by laughter and music, a thought began to take shape more clearly than ever before, that if I wanted to be seen, I might have to create my own path. Instead of waiting for someone to turn around and notice me, no one remembered that just a few days later, I would also be stepping into an important milestone in my life. A day that should have meant just as much as my sister's graduation, yet, in the lively atmosphere and the constant stream of congratulations directed at her, it seemed to completely disappear, as if it had never existed. I found myself wondering more than once whether I should mention it, whether I should step into a conversation and say that I too was preparing for something important, that I had worked just as hard to achieve my own accomplishments. But every time that thought surfaced, I quickly pushed it away, not because I did not want to be acknowledged, but because I feared the feeling of being ignored. Once again, feared that if I spoke up, my story would be cut off midway. Or, worse, immediately compared to my sister, just as things had always been. So I chose silence, continuing to handle the small tasks at the party, as if that was the only role I was allowed to have. While deep inside, a part of me still hoped that someone would remember, that my parents would suddenly turn to me and ask about my plans, that they would realize I was also standing at a turning point. But time passed, and it never happened. Every moment of the celebration moved forward with laughter and conversations, while I slowly realized that this silence was not temporary, but something that had become a pattern, a habit that everyone unconsciously accepted, including myself. I began to reflect on everything I had been through: the late nights, studying alone, the times I handled difficulties without asking for help, the moments I wanted to share small victories, but could not find anyone to listen. All of it suddenly became clearer than ever, like a slow-motion film, in which I was both the observer and the main character. And in that moment I realized that the issue was not only that others did not remember me, but that I had become used to placing myself in the background, used to not speaking up for myself, used to accepting that my achievements were not important enough to be mentioned. Realizing this did not make me feel more hurt, but instead brought a strange clarity, as if I could finally see my place in this picture. And more importantly, I understood that if I continued to stay silent, nothing would change. No one would suddenly turn around and notice me if I did not give them a reason. That thought was intimidating at first, because it meant stepping out of my comfort zone and facing the possibility of being dismissed again. But at the same time, it gave me a new feeling, a sense of control that I had never truly held before. I no longer wanted to wait for the perfect moment or for recognition to come naturally from my family. I began to think about how I could create that moment for myself, how I could make my story heard, not by interrupting or competing for attention, but by continuing to work and letting my results speak at the right time. And even though that day had not yet arrived, even though this celebration passed without anyone mentioning me, I knew that something inside me had shifted, a quiet but steady determination that I would not always remain the one who was forgotten in important moments, that I also had the right to step forward, and that when my day came, I would not let it pass in silence like this again. I studied quietly for years, not under bright lights or loud praise, but in small, silent corners where it was just me and the goals I set for myself every evening. As the house slowly fell into silence, I would open my books, turning each page with a level of focus that sometimes surprised even me. There was no one standing behind me, pushing me forward, no reminders or clear expectations from my parents. All I had was an inner drive, a desire to prove that I too could achieve something meaningful. I remember the late nights when exhaustion crept in, my eyes burning, yet still forcing myself to read another chapter, solve another problem, as if each small effort was a brick, building the path I was creating. On my own, there were moments when I felt deeply alone, especially when I could hear laughter and conversation from the living room while I sat by myself in my room. But instead of stopping, I learned to turn that feeling into motivation. Every comparison to my sister, every time I was overlooked in conversations, I told myself I would respond, not with words, but with results. The journey was not easy. There were tests I did not perform as well as I hoped, times when I doubted myself and questioned whether all this effort would lead to anything at all. But then I would remember why I started, the feeling of wanting to be recognized, to stand beside others instead of behind them. And that thought pushed me forward again. I gradually built my own discipline, a study routine that did not depend on external validation. I learned to set my own goals, evaluate myself, and reward myself when I reached small milestones. And over time, those efforts began to accumulate. My grades became more consistent and then steadily improved. Teachers started to notice me, not because I was someone's sibling, but because of my own achievements. Yet what was remarkable was that I no longer depended on that attention from my family, not because I did not need it, but because I had become used to recognizing my own worth. That did not mean I had no hope. It simply meant I no longer placed my entire value on whether others saw me or not. As each day passed, I felt closer to a better version of myself, one that was no longer defined by my sister's shadow, but built through my own quiet efforts. And even though the road ahead was still long, and I knew many challenges were waiting, I kept moving forward with a steady belief that everything I was doing mattered, that every hour of study and every attempt was bringing me closer to my goal. And more importantly, I understood that my worth was not determined by recognition, but by the journey. I had committed myself to a journey that may not be loud, but was strong enough to change the way I saw myself forever. The awards ceremony day arrived, and although I had imagined this moment countless times during my years of quiet studying, the reality felt very different, a mixture of excitement and disbelief, as if all the effort I had poured into every hour of studying, every test, every late night, had finally come together in this single day. I walked into the auditorium, with my heart beating faster than usual, my hands slightly trembling as I held the notice I had read over and over again. The words confirming that I was the top student of the class still felt unfamiliar, Even though they belonged to me, around me were my classmates. People who had shared this journey with me, the soft hum of conversations and nervous laughter, creating a unique atmosphere. And as I looked around, I saw many families sitting in the audience ready to witness their children's important moment. Proud eyes, encouraging hugs, quiet words of congratulations. All of it made the scene feel warm, and also made me aware of a small emptiness inside me, because I did not see my parents there. I had known this beforehand, but facing it directly was still not easy. Even so, I did not let it hold me back, because I understood that today was not only about who was present, but about what I had achieved. The ceremony began with formal speeches. The principal spoke about the journey of our class, the challenges we had overcome, and as each name was called, I could feel my moment getting closer. Every step someone else took toward the stage made my heart beat a little faster until finally my name echoed through the hall. In that instant, everything around me seemed to fade, leaving only my steps moving forward, steady and stronger than I expected. I walked onto the stage and received the recognition. I had worked so hard for the lights shining down, applause filling the room. And in that moment, I felt a deep sense of pride. Not loud, but powerful enough to fill the emptiness inside me. I did not need to look into the crowd, searching for a familiar face anymore, because for the first time I realized I could stand on my own. The short speech I had prepared became easier as I spoke each word, coming from sincerity, from the journey I had taken. I did not speak about absence or what I lacked, but about what I had learned, about persistence, about believing in myself, even when no one else did. When I stepped off the stage, the certificate in my hands felt lighter than I had imagined. Yet its meaning was far heavier, because it was not just an award, but proof of all my quiet efforts. And as I returned to my seat and looked around, once more I no longer felt out of place. Instead, there was a calmness, a sense of completion I had never experienced before. And even though the day was not perfect in the way I once expected, it became one of the most important moments of my life, because it was the day I was not only recognized, but also recognized my own worth, something no one could ever take away. After the ceremony, as people began gathering to take photos, hug each other, and call their families, I stood still for a few seconds, took a deep breath, and pulled out my phone. In my mind, there was one clear thought: that I still wanted to share this moment with my parents, even though I had already prepared myself for the possibility that they might not come. I opened the photo I had just taken on stage, adjusted the brightness slightly, and wrote a simple message. Not too long, just: I received the valedictorian award today. I hope you can see this. I read it over several times, editing each word as if writing it the right way would make them understand everything I wanted to say. Finally, I pressed send. The screen lit up for a few seconds, and then returned to normal. Nothing changed, no read receipt, no immediate reply. I told myself that maybe they were busy, perhaps still at my sister's celebration, or on their way home. I put my phone back in my pocket, but took it out again just minutes later, like a habit I could not control. Every time the screen lit up, I hoped to see a new notification, a message or a call. Even a short congratulation would have been enough to make me feel connected around me. My friends were laughing and talking, some showing off large bouquets of flowers, others being held tightly by their families who did not want to let go. Those moments felt warm, yet made me feel like I was standing outside of it, not because I lacked achievement, but because I had no one to share it with at that moment. I forced a smile as I took photos with my friends, but in my mind there was still an empty space, waiting for something that had not come. Time passed more slowly than I expected, each minute stretching longer as I kept checking my phone. Sometimes I blamed myself for expecting anything, for thinking that this time might be different. But then I reminded myself that sending the message was not wrong, because it was what I genuinely wanted. I wanted them to know that I had achieved something important, that I was no longer standing behind. After a while, my phone lit up again, and my heart paused for a second, but it was only a notification from a friend. I smiled and replied, trying to keep my emotions steady, but the silence from my family continued. There was no sign that they had read the message or even seen it in that moment. I clearly felt the contrast between what was happening around me and what I was experiencing inside. On one side, there was celebration light and laughter. On the other, there was waiting that stretched into emptiness. And, although I had grown used to being overlooked, this time felt different, because I had taken a step toward them. I had opened a door, yet the other side remained silent. It made me realize that not every attempt to connect leads to the result we hope for, and that some distances cannot be closed with a single message or a single moment. I stood there a little longer, looking one last time at the screen with no response, then gently locked my phone, took a deep breath, and told myself that I could not let this moment be defined by that silence, because what I had achieved did not depend on whether someone replied or not. And even though part of me was still waiting, another part had begun to accept that some answers would never come the way I wanted, but that did not diminish the value of the journey I had just completed. Instead, it helped me understand that sometimes moving forward is not about everything being complete, but about choosing not to stop because of what is missing. But the only response was an unbelievable silence, a pause that was not just a few minutes or hours, but seemed to stretch with every thought that crossed my mind. Each time my phone screen lit up and then dimmed again without any notification from my parents, I felt a quiet sense of disappointment settle inside me. At first, I tried to explain the silence with reasonable excuses. Maybe they were busy with guests, maybe their phone had died, maybe they had not had time to read the message yet. But as time passed, those explanations began to feel fragile, like thin threads that could not hold together the hope that was slowly slipping away. I began to realize that this silence was no longer just a delay, but more like an unspoken answer, a kind of response I had experienced many times before. In the past, only this time it felt clearer, deeper, and harder to ignore. I stood among the crowd that was gradually thinning after the ceremony, the sound of laughter still echoing somewhere, but no longer as full as before. And in that space, I could clearly feel the distance between me and my family. Not a physical distance, but an emotional one that I did not know how to close. I remembered all the times before when I had tried to share something important, a small joy, a personal achievement, and had received silence or half-hearted responses. But it had never felt as prolonged and defined as it did now. Part of me still wanted to wait a little longer, just a few more minutes, another chance for the screen to light up with a simple message, but another part of me was beginning to understand that I might be waiting for something that would not come. And that tension between hope and reality was more exhausting than anything else. I stepped outside the auditorium, where the air felt cooler and easier to breathe. Yet the weight inside me remained. I watched other families standing together, taking their final photos, laughing and preserving this moment as a memory, and I wondered if having someone there for me would have changed how I felt. But then I realized that the question itself no longer mattered, because the reality was already in front of me, and I could not change it. By wondering, I stopped at a quiet corner and took out my phone one more time, not because I believed there would be a message, but as a way to close the last piece of hope. The screen was still empty. Nothing new, no sign that they had seen what I sent. I looked at my message, the words still there, unchanged, like something that had never been heard. And in that moment, I did not feel sadness in the way I had expected. There were no tears, no emotional outburst, only a strange calmness, as if I had accepted something that deep down I had known for a long time, that family is not always the place where your important moments are acknowledged. That some silences are not because people forget, but because they do not place the same importance on it. And realizing that did not take away my value, but instead helped me see myself more clearly, to understand how far I had come without needing that validation. I took a deep breath, put my phone away, and kept walking, not because everything was fine, but because I knew I could not stand there, waiting for a response that would not come. And even though that silence remained, I knew I would not let it define the path ahead of me, because my journey did not end with an unanswered message, but continued with the steps I chose to take on my own. Meanwhile, their social media was filled with photos and praise for my sister. And the moment that made the contrast most obvious was when I absent-mindedly opened the app just to check my phone again, a habit I had not yet been able to break. I scrolled through the feed and immediately saw bright images from her graduation celebration. Pictures taken from different angles. Her smile always at the center, surrounded by family friends, large bouquets, and long emotional captions. My parents posted messages using words I had never seen them use for me. They spoke about pride, about her journey of growth, about how she had made them happy. Every sentence, carefully written as if they wanted the whole world to know that she was a success they had helped create. And I sat there, looking at the screen, feeling as though I was reading about a completely different family, one in which I did not exist. I did not blame them for being proud of her, because she deserved it. But what made me think was the complete silence when it came to me. There was not a single mention, not a single photo, no indication that they even knew about my day. The contrast was not loud, but it was undeniable. One side was public, bright, and full of pride. The other was silence, stretched to the point of invisibility. I kept scrolling and saw comments from friends and acquaintances, congratulating her, praising my parents for raising such a successful child. And my parents replied to each comment, enthusiastically interacting and joking, as if they were fully enjoying that moment, while I sat alone, in a quiet corner, watching everything unfold through a small screen. For a moment I wondered if I should post something myself, whether I should share my achievement, so that at least my friends would know, to create some sign that this day mattered to me too. But then I stopped, not because I was afraid of comparison or being ignored, but because I realized I did not want to turn my achievement into a way to seek attention from people who had not noticed it from the beginning. I wanted this moment to remain genuine, not mixed with the need to prove something to anyone else, and that thought made me put my phone down. No longer scrolling, no longer searching for any sign from them. I sat still for a while, letting my emotions settle, and instead of feeling hurt, as I had expected, I began to see the situation differently. Not as them choosing not to care about me, but as them choosing to focus on what they considered more important, and that while not fair was a reality. I could not change, but what I could change was how I responded to it. I could continue, comparing and waiting for similar recognition, or I could accept that my path would be different, that my value did not need to be reflected in posts or photos shared online. Realizing that did not make me feel smaller, but instead gave me a certain sense of freedom, as if I had stepped out of a cycle I had been stuck in for too long. And even though I knew the silence from my family would still affect me for some time, I also knew that I was no longer completely dependent on it, because today, even without being mentioned on their social media, was still meaningful to me. A day I would remember not for what they failed to do, but for what I had achieved on my own. The moment I stepped onto the stage to receive the award, I felt both proud and empty. At the same time, a strange feeling that I could not immediately define, because it was neither pure joy, as I had imagined, nor a clear sadness, but a blend of both. When my name was announced again, and applause filled the hall, I stood up from my seat, took a deep breath, and walked toward the bright lights ahead. The light shining directly into my eyes made me squint slightly. Yet I kept moving forward, each step carrying the weight of the long journey I had taken. From the quiet days of studying to the moments when I doubted myself, everything seemed to converge in that single moment. And when I reached the final step and stood in front of the principal, I could clearly feel my heart beating faster, not out of fear, but from the awareness that this was a moment I had been waiting for a long time. I received the certificate from his hand, the brief but firm handshake, feeling like an official recognition. The applause rose again, louder and longer this time, and I looked out into the audience, not searching for a specific face, but simply taking in the space that was now focused on me. And in that instant, a quiet sense of pride rose within me, not the kind that wanted to prove something to others, but the kind that came from knowing I had done it. that all my efforts had not been meaningless. Yet at the same time, there was still a sense of emptiness, like a part of the picture that remained unfinished. I realized that no matter how many people applauded, no matter how bright the lights were, a part of me still wanted to share this moment with my family. And when that did not happen, the emptiness quietly settled in, not strong enough to overpower the pride, but clear enough that I could not ignore it. I stood there for a few seconds longer than usual, as if trying to absorb every detail, from the sounds and lights to the feeling inside me, because I knew this would be one of the moments that stayed with me for a long time. As I turned and walked off the stage, my steps felt lighter, not because the weight had disappeared, but because I had accepted it as part of my story. I returned to my seat, holding the certificate, and when I looked at it, I saw not just an award, but the time and effort I had invested to earn it. What surprised me was that I no longer felt the need to prove anything. I did not see it as an answer to my family's silence, but simply as a milestone I had reached for myself, realizing that helped ease the emptiness, not completely removing it, but making it less overwhelming. I began to understand that some moments in life carry both fulfillment and absence at the same time, and accepting both is what helps us grow. As the ceremony continued, I sat quietly observing, no longer comparing or searching for something from others, but simply being present in my own moment. And even though the silence from my family remained, I knew it could not erase what I had just achieved. Because the moment I stepped onto that stage, whether anyone was there to witness it or not, was a real milestone, one that belonged to me and me alone. I realized that there are forms of recognition I may never receive from my family, and this understanding did not come suddenly, but formed gradually through small experiences, accumulating over time, like how a drop of water does not create change immediately, but can wear down even the hardest surface if repeated long enough. I remembered moments from long ago, when I still believed that if I tried just a little harder, if I achieved something bigger, things would change, that my parents would look at me the way they looked at my sister. But over the years, with every time I waited for praise that never came, that hope became more fragile until I stood on the stage that day and realized that even after achieving what I once thought would be enough to change their perception, the silence remained unchanged, unmoved. And in that moment I understood that the issue was not that I was not good enough, but that their recognition was not something I could control. Realizing this was initially disappointing, because it felt like letting go of a hope I had carried for so long. But at the same time, it brought a sense of relief I had not expected, because when I stopped trying to earn that recognition, I no longer had to carry the pressure of proving myself. I began to look at my journey from a different perspective, not as a series of efforts to gain attention, but as a process of growth that I had experienced on my own. Each achievement and step forward was no longer a message directed at my family, but became part of the story I was writing for myself. This did not mean I no longer wished for their recognition, but it meant I no longer placed my entire value on it. I understood that there are people in life who may never see you the way you want, not because you are not worthy, but because they have become accustomed to a different image of you and are not ready to change it. And instead of continuing to try to break that pattern, I began to focus on what I could control, on how I saw myself, on whether I was proud of what I had done. When I thought about it, I realized how far I had come, not only in terms of achievement, but in understanding myself. I was no longer the child, waiting for a nod of approval to feel enough, but someone who could evaluate their own worth based on effort and persistence. And this realization, even though it came from a difficult truth, became a turning point, because it allowed me to step out of the cycle of waiting and disappointment and move toward a place where I could stand on my own without relying on external validation. I knew this journey was not over, that there would still be moments when I felt something missing, but I also knew that I now had a stronger foundation to face them. And when I looked back on that day, I no longer saw it as something incomplete, but as a day that marked a shift in how I understood my value. A value that no longer depended on who recognized it, but was built from everything I had consistently worked toward, and that made me feel stronger, not because everything was perfect, but because I had learned to accept the imperfection and still move forward. After the ceremony, as the crowd slowly thinned and the laughter softened into scattered conversations across the school grounds, I began to walk slowly toward the hallway, still holding my certificate in my hand, like something both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. Inside me. There was no longer the same sense of waiting as before, but instead a quiet stillness, as if everything had passed a point I could not return from. I walked past groups of families taking their final photos, long embraces and lingering congratulations still filling the air. And even though I did not have anyone standing beside me in that moment, I no longer felt the same emptiness because I had accepted that today carried a different meaning for me. Just as I was about to leave the main area, a calm, but clear voice called my name from behind. I turned instinctively and saw a man standing a short distance away, dressed in a simple but neat suit. His eyes focused on me in a way that caught me off guard, because it was not a casual glance, but genuine attention. He walked closer and introduced himself as one of the school's sponsors, someone who had been following student performances throughout the year. I felt slightly awkward hearing that, not because I lacked confidence, but because I was not used to someone acknowledging my journey. So directly, he said that he had noticed the consistency in my academic results, not just the high grades, but the way I maintained them over time, which he believed was far more difficult than achieving a single standout success. I listened carefully to every word he said, feeling as if each sentence was touching a very real part of my journey, a part that had never truly been recognized. Before he continued by saying that among the many profiles he had reviewed, what impressed him most was not flashy achievements, but persistence, and that he saw that quality in me. In that moment, I did not know how to respond, because I had never imagined that someone would notice my quiet efforts. The late nights, the times I overcame challenges on my own, without encouragement. He smiled gently and said that, because of that, he wanted to offer me an opportunity, not just as a reward, but as an investment in the potential he believed I had. When he presented the idea of a full scholarship, along with a personal development program that many students dreamed of, but few could access, I could hardly believe what I was hearing, not because it felt impossible, but because it came at a moment when I had just experienced silence from my own family. The contrast between those two realities made me pause for a few seconds. I could feel my heart beating faster, not from pressure, but from the feeling of being seen in a way I had never experienced before. I nodded, not immediately answering, but as a way to ground myself in the moment, to confirm that this was real, and not something I had imagined. When I finally spoke to thank him, I realized my voice was steadier than I expected, because deep down, I understood that this opportunity was not just the result of today, but the accumulation of everything I had consistently worked toward. And in that moment, I was no longer thinking about who had not been there, but focusing on what was opening in front of me, a new path, a new possibility, and a confirmation that my efforts had been recognized, even if not by the people I once hoped for, but by someone who truly understood their value. He said he was impressed by my persistence and achievements, and offered me a full scholarship, along with an opportunity that many people only dream of. But what left me speechless was not just the value of the reward itself, but the way he understood my journey. He did not focus on the highest scores, or the title I had just received. Instead, he emphasized the periods when I maintained consistency, the times when I did not give up, despite having no encouragement. The way I kept moving forward without external attention. Every word he spoke seemed to perfectly describe what I had experienced, and it made me feel as if for the first time, someone truly understood the path I had taken. I stood there, trying to remain composed, while inside a complex emotion rose within me, not an overwhelming burst of joy, but a warm and steady feeling spreading through me. As if my quiet efforts had finally reached someone perceptive enough to recognize them, he went on to explain that the scholarship did not only cover academic expenses, but also included a mentorship program, where I would have the chance to work with experienced individuals in the field I wanted to pursue, to be guided, challenged, and developed in ways that not everyone has access to. I listened to every detail, feeling as though a door was opening in front of me, one that I had only allowed myself to imagine during rare moments when I dared to think about a different future, a future not limited by circumstances or the absence of recognition. He handed me a set of documents and said I could take my time to review them and did not need to make an immediate decision. Yet in his eyes, I could see a clear sense of trust, as if he had already made up his mind long before. Speaking to me, that trust made me feel both empowered and responsible, not in a way that created pressure, but in a way that encouraged me to go further. I took the documents, my hands slightly trembling, not out of fear, but from realizing that this moment could change many aspects of my life. I looked at him and thanked him, not only for the opportunity, but for seeing me in a way I had always hoped for, but had never received from my family. He smiled and said that sometimes the best paths open for places we least expect, and what matters is being ready to step through when the opportunity appears. Those words stayed with me because they reflected exactly what was happening. I had spent so much time waiting for recognition from a specific place that I failed to see my value could be recognized elsewhere, perhaps even more clearly and deeply. When the conversation ended, I stood there for a moment longer, looking at the documents in my hand, fully aware that this was not just a reward, but a turning point. A chance to continue my story in a new direction, one where I was no longer defined by what had not happened, but by what I chose to do next. And in that moment I understood that even though my journey had begun in silence, it did not have to end that way. Because sometimes it is the empty spaces that create room for unexpected opportunities. And when I am willing to embrace them, not only change my circumstances, but also transform the way I see my own worth. For the first time, I felt truly seen for my own worth, not as someone's younger sibling, but as myself, and that feeling did not arrive like a sudden wave, but spread slowly, settling into every thought and every breath, as if I had stepped out of a confined space I had been in for so long without realizing it. I stood there, still holding the documents, but my mind drifted back to everything I had gone through, from the nights I studied, alone in my room, the moments I had to encourage myself when no one else did, to the times I questioned whether all my effort truly mattered. And now, as someone completely outside the influence of my family's perspective, looked at me with respect and belief, I realized that my value had never depended on how my family saw me. It had always existed independently. I had simply spent too much time waiting for validation from a place where it would never come. This realization did not make me angry or regretful. Instead, it brought a strange sense of peace, as if I had finally put down a weight I had been carrying unconsciously for years. I began to see everything around me differently, no longer comparing myself or placing myself beneath someone else, but simply acknowledging that everyone has their own journey, and mine, even if quiet and unnoticed, still had its own meaning. I thought about my parents and how they always focused on my sister, and for the first time I did not feel the need to change that, not because I did not care anymore, but because I understood that their perspective could not define who I was. What mattered more was how I saw myself. I realized that over time I had already been building a version of myself that did not rely on their recognition, a version that could stand on its own, move forward, and measure its worth through lived experience. As that understanding became clearer, I felt a kind of confidence I had never known before. Not the kind that comes from proving oneself better than others, but the certainty that I no longer needed to prove anything at all. I walked out of the school grounds as the afternoon sunlight softened, and the air felt calmer, and everything seemed clearer in my eyes. I was no longer carrying the emptiness from before, but instead a sense of completeness, not because everything was perfect, but because I had learned to accept imperfection without letting it diminish my value. I knew the road ahead would still hold challenges, that there would be moments when I would again face absence or unmet expectations. But I also knew that I now had a different foundation, a different way of understanding to face them. And that made me less afraid than before, because I understood that whether anyone saw me or not, I could continue moving forward with confidence and belief in myself. And this moment, the moment I realized my worth did not depend on anyone else, became one of the most important turning points in my life. A turning point that was not loud, but powerful enough to change how I saw myself and the path I would choose to follow next. I walked away from that place with a quiet smile, not the kind of overwhelming joy, but a deep sense of peace within me, as if I had finally set down a weight I had been carrying for years without even realizing it. My steps were slow but steady, each one filled with a new clarity about the path ahead. Did not turn back to see if anyone was watching me, because for the first time, I understood that it no longer mattered. What I had experienced that day was not just a ceremony or a title, but a transformation in how I saw myself. I remembered the moment I was offered the scholarship, the moment a stranger recognized my worth without any comparison. And it made me realize that the world is far bigger than the space I once felt confined to. There are doors I never knew existed, waiting to be opened. Not because of luck, but because I had been persistent enough to reach them. As I stepped out of the school gate, the afternoon sunlight stretched across the ground, and in that moment, I felt like I was stepping into a new chapter of my life, one where I was no longer someone's shadow, but the main character of my own story. I no longer saw my family's silence as something that made me incomplete, but as part of the journey that had made me stronger. Because without those empty spaces, I might never have learned how to stand on my own, to recognize myself, and to move forward with confidence. I know the road ahead will not always be easy. There will be challenges, moments when I feel doubt or a lack of support, but this time I am no longer afraid, because I now have a stronger foundation, a belief built from my own experiences. I understand that my value does not come from who sees or acknowledges me, but from the journey I have taken and what I continue to do from here. And when I think about the future, I no longer feel lost, but instead I see a clearer direction, not because I have all the answers, but because I trust myself to find them along the way. I smile as I think about the opportunities ahead, the people I will meet, the lessons I will learn, and I know that wherever this path leads me, I will never return to the feeling of standing on the sidelines, because I have stepped out of that place, and I will keep moving forward with everything I have. And if this story resonates with you, if you have ever felt overlooked or unseen, remember that your value does not depend on anyone else. Keep working, keep believing in yourself, and do not stop just because someone fails to see you, because one day the right person will come and recognize everything you have done. When that happens, you will realize that all your effort was worth it. So if you want to hear more stories like this, do not forget to like, subscribe, and share to spread this message to more people, because your story might be the inspiration someone out there needs. Life away from home is not just about changing where you live, but also about facing emotional gaps that you may have never clearly felt before. When you leave your family, the smallest things such as shared dinners, familiar voices, or quiet daily care suddenly become incredibly valuable. At first, many people believe they are strong enough to adapt quickly, but in reality, homesickness often appears unexpectedly on rainy days, when seeing a familiar dish, or simply at the end of a long day with no one to talk to. Loneliness when living away from home is not just about being physically alone, but also about the absence of deep emotional connections with loved ones. Even when making new friends or joining social activities, there are still silent moments when no one can replace the role of family. During those times, people may feel empty, recall old memories, and sometimes question whether leaving was the right decision. However, these emotions play an important role in personal growth. Homesickness helps us appreciate what we once had and understand the true value of family love and care. Loneliness, though uncomfortable, becomes an opportunity to face ourselves, to listen to our thoughts and emotions without external influence. Over time, those living away from home learn to transform loneliness into personal space, for growth finding joy in small things, such as reading, walking, or pursuing new hobbies. They also learn to maintain connections with family in different ways, like calling, texting, or sharing daily stories, which reduces emotional distance despite physical separation. Still, there will always be moments of weakness when homesickness becomes overwhelming, making one wish to return to the safest place. Yet overcoming those moments builds resilience and teaches us that we can stand on our own even without family by our side every day. In the end, life away from home teaches a profound lesson. Loneliness is not entirely negative, but a natural part of growth, helping us understand ourselves better and appreciate the most important relationships in life. Life away from home is a major turning point where individuals are forced to step out of their comfort zones and face reality more directly and fully. When living with family, many things seem natural: meals, prepared clothes washed, or daily reminders of care, and are often taken for granted. However, when living away from home, none of these things happen automatically anymore, and each person must take responsibility for even the smallest aspects of life. From managing time and finances to taking care of health and handling unexpected problems, everything becomes a personal responsibility. Through this process, individuals gradually learn independence, thinking carefully before acting, and taking responsibility for their decisions. At first, many people feel overwhelmed and confused when facing so many responsibilities at once. Mistakes are inevitable, such as overspending, missing important tasks, or not knowing how to handle difficult situations. Yet these mistakes become valuable lessons that contribute to personal growth. With no one behind to fix things or provide constant support, those living away from home must stand up on their own, find solutions, and learn from their experiences. Over time, they become stronger and more confident in problem solving, no longer easily shaken by challenges. Independence is not only about taking care of oneself, but also about building a personal life. Individuals learn to set goals, make plans, and persistently pursue their chosen paths even when the journey is not easy. Living away from home also helps people understand the value of money and hard work, leading them to appreciate what they earn. Moreover, being in a new environment with different cultures, people, and lifestyles helps develop adaptability. People must learn how to communicate, connect, and integrate with others, expanding their perspectives and forming new social relationships. All these experiences contribute to shaping a more mature, independent, and responsible individual. Although this journey is not easy, it brings long-lasting values that no other environment can replace. Ultimately, growth and independence do not come from theory or advice, but are shaped through real-life experiences as individuals learn to stand on their own feet. Life away from home is not just about leaving a familiar place, but also an opportunity to step into a larger world where individuals can discover themselves and gain new experiences they may never have had before. When living with family, people are often surrounded by familiar habits, expectations, and routines. However, once they leave, they gain the freedom to choose how to live, how to think, and which path to follow. This freedom opens up a meaningful journey of self-discovery, where individuals begin to ask important questions about who they are, what they truly want, and what makes them happy. Away from home each day can bring new experiences, from adapting to a different environment, meeting people from diverse cultures, to trying things they had never dared to before. These experiences, whether big or small, enrich life and help individuals better understand the world around them. At the same time, exposure to different perspectives, lifestyles, and values helps broaden their mindset, teaching them to respect differences and develop a more well-rounded view of life. During this process, there will be moments of confusion or uncertainty, especially when facing important decisions without clear guidance from family. Yet these moments are when individuals learn to listen to themselves, trust their instincts, and make their own choices. Over time, they come to understand that making mistakes or changing direction is not failure, but a natural part of growth and self-discovery. Living away from home is also an ideal time to pursue passions and explore new fields. Some may discover a love for art, others may find strengths in their careers, and some may realize that what they truly want is different from what they once believed. All of these experiences contribute to shaping a clearer personal identity, helping individuals become more confident and determined in their chosen paths. Moreover, the experiences gained while living away from home become valuable assets for the future. They teach people how to adapt, innovate, and continuously learn in an ever-changing world. Ultimately, the journey of self-discovery and new experiences while living away from home not only helps individuals understand themselves better, but also enables them to live more meaningfully, appreciate each moment, and boldly pursue the life they desire. Life away from home not only offers opportunities for growth and self-discovery, but also places individuals under various pressures and challenges that they must face directly. Without family nearby to support or share burdens, difficulties in study work and daily life become more apparent and heavier. Financial pressure is one of the biggest challenges. Those living away from home must cover expenses such as rent, food, transportation, and other unexpected costs, forcing them to manage money more carefully and responsibly. During times of unstable income or unexpected problems, feelings of anxiety and insecurity can become overwhelming, sometimes even affecting sleep and mental health. In addition, academic and work-related pressure is unavoidable. Without someone to constantly encourage or remind them, individuals must motivate themselves to complete tasks, maintain discipline, and overcome procrastination. There are days of exhaustion and prolonged stress, yet they must continue pushing forward, because there is no other choice. Furthermore, adapting to a new living environment is another significant challenge. Differences in culture, lifestyle, and communication styles can make individuals feel isolated or struggle to fit in. They may find it difficult to build new relationships or face unfamiliar situations without knowing whom to turn to for advice. The combination of loneliness and pressure can negatively impact mental well-being, reducing motivation and self-confidence. However, these pressures and challenges play a crucial role in strengthening one's resilience and character. By overcoming difficult periods, individuals become stronger, learn to control their emotions, and face problems more calmly. They develop skills in planning, prioritizing tasks, and finding solutions instead of avoiding issues. More importantly, they realize they are capable of enduring and overcoming more than they once believed. Life away from home also teaches the importance of balance between work and rest, pressure and joy, helping maintain mental stability. Although this journey is not easy, every challenge overcome is a step toward personal growth. In the end, pressure is no longer something to fear, but a driving force that helps individuals improve themselves and build a more stable and confident life in the future. Life away from home is not only a journey of independence and growth, but also a period that helps individuals realize the true value of family and emotional connection. When living with family, many people often take daily care and affection for granted. A warm meal, a simple question, or the presence of loved ones may not always be fully appreciated. However, once they are far away, these small things become deeply missed and longed for. Physical distance creates a gap in life, making individuals realize that family is not just a place to return to, but also a powerful source of emotional support. When facing pressure and difficulties in a distant place, many people recall the teachings and values passed down by their parents, which gives them the strength to keep going. Staying connected with family while living away from home is no longer about daily face-to-face conversations, but about phone calls, messages, or brief yet meaningful exchanges. This shift makes every interaction more precious, transforming it from a habit into an emotional necessity. Many realize that simply hearing the voice of a loved one can bring comfort and renewed energy. Moreover, living away from home helps individuals understand the sacrifices of their family. When they have to manage everything on their own, from finances to daily responsibilities, they begin to realize that what their parents did for them was far from simple. This awareness fosters deep gratitude and a desire to give back in the future. Additionally, distance allows family relationships to mature. Instead of dependency, individuals learn to respect each other's personal space while maintaining strong bonds through genuine care and communication. Life away from home also makes reunions more meaningful than ever. Each return is not just a meeting, but a moment to share, understand one another better, and make up for lost time. Simple hugs, conversations, or family meals carry deeper emotional significance. These experiences remind individuals that no matter how far they go, family remains their strongest support system. Ultimately, living away from home teaches that connection is not defined by physical distance, but by care, understanding, and sincere love. When people learn to value and maintain family relationships, they will always have a place to return to both physically and emotionally, no matter how life changes.